welcome to another edition of Brunswick Today. I'm Jeff Neidert. Now today on our show we have some interesting topics for you. If you're looking to redecorate your home, you'll be wanting to stay tuned for our decorating ideas. It's the second in our series of 5 parts to tell you how to decorate your home properly. Also, if you're in the mood for some good German food, you'll find out how to make your very own sauerkraut from the Medina County Cooperative Extension Service. But first up on the show, on Speaking of Books, we'll learn how France's silk industry spawned a novel. That novel is Tree of Gold by Rosalind Laker.
Welcome to another edition of Speaking of Books, furnished as a service of Reader's Digest condensed books. I'm Robin Bergstrom. Today, we're going to travel back through time to France in the era of Napoleon Bonaparte. The years of revolution and the terror are over, and in the city of Lyon, famous far and wide as the silk capital of the country, it promises to be a period of new glory. This is the setting for a sweeping new romantic historical novel by Rosalind Laker called Tree of Gold. It's one of the lavishly illustrated selections in the current volume of Reader's Digest condensed books. Rosalind Laker, who lives and writes in England, is the popular author of more than 20 novels. In Tree of Gold, Rosalind Laker paints a vivid, dramatic portrait of a colorful period in history and introduces readers to a beautiful young heroine who is as captivating as she is courageous. Here to tell us something about the background of the book is Maureen Mackey, an editor at Reader's Digest condensed books. Maureen, what is the Tree of Gold, and what is the significance of it in the title of Rosalind Laker's book?
Well, the Tree of Gold is a very magical, dramatic way of referring to the mulberry tree, which was the single source of sustenance for the silkworm. And the author chose that title to refer to the silks, which is the topic of her book. The way she got interested in the topic was she saw a campaign tent of Napoleon's on display in a New York City museum. And once she saw that, she immediately thought of the rivalry that must have existed during the time period to get the commission to weave that campaign tent. And so from that single idea, she developed this historical romance.
And this is rather typical of the way this author works, isn't it? This
Yes,
historical, romantic author picks up ideas from everywhere.
That's right. She's always fascinated with finery, and from whether it's jewels or craftsmanship of one kind or another, that's the way she gets into the topic and the romance.
History behind it.
Yes.
Fascinating. Makes great reading. Let's talk a little bit about the time frame of this book. The years range from 1804 to about 1815. That was the time when Napoleon was building France up back after the Revolution. What is the significance, the direct impact of that time period on the silk industry?
It's a great impact because Napoleon was very anxious to rebuild France after the Revolution, and part of that rebuilding included refurbishing his palaces, which had been damaged and stripped during the Revolution. So he went out of his way to help the silk industry of Lyon, France, by commissioning a number of silks to be done for his many palaces. And it's very interesting when you get into the various colors and emblems that he found important to him. There are stars in here, which he was fond of. The eagle was a symbol of the empire. It's really very fascinating to know that he went out of his way to build up the palaces.
But what were the silks used for? Campaign tents out in the...
Yes, campaign tents, among other things.
Could they really be sturdy?
Well, the tent itself wasn't made of silk. This was really a decorative element. They were also used for clothing. The heroine of this book, Gabrielle, is always wearing some fascinating silk clothing of one kind or another. So they were used for clothing, decorative elements, window adornments, all kinds of things.
A lot more silk around than there is now.
Well, probably it was just really beginning to get started.
Now, there's a line in the book about the main character, Gabrielle. It goes, "Silk was in her blood, and the weavers loved her for it."
Yes.
I want to elaborate a little bit about that?
Gabrielle knew from the time she was a young girl that she wanted to be directly involved in the silk manufacturing industry. Her father owned a silk shop. She was apprenticed as a child to weave silk with the weavers. So even though she was a woman of substance, you could say, and style, she was learning how to weave from the very beginning like any other worker.
Pretty
So
unusual back in the early 1800s, isn't it?
unusual in the sense that she knew what she wanted to do for the rest of her life. And in fact, this is borne out through the book.
The book in our spotlight today has been Tree of Gold, a robust, romantic historical novel by Rosalind Laker, set in Napoleonic France. We'll be talking more about the book with editor Maureen Mackey on an upcoming program. The beautiful film images you've just seen come from an authoritative documentary, Imperial Silk, a Lyon Tradition, produced by the Fashion Institute of Technology, and we thank them for permitting us to share it with you. Now this is Robin Bergstrom saying goodbye for this edition of Speaking of Books, furnished by Reader's Digest Condensed Books. Hope you'll join us again soon for our next report on books you'll want to read and remember.
Well, quite a few of you probably got out to the Medina County Oktoberfest over the weekend, but if you didn't get enough of that good German food and want to make some of your own, the Medina County branch of the Cooperative Extension Service tells you how to make your own sauerkraut.
Start out by making some sauerkraut. Sauerkraut is classified as a fermented pickle. When making sauerkraut, we want to select solid heads of cabbage, cut them in half, take the core out, and wash them. I've already done this, and now we're ready to slice them and get them ready for the kraut pot. And so what we're going to do is to use a sharp knife, and we can cut them, slice the cabbage either with a knife on a cutting board and cut them the thickness of a dime. So you have to work quite a while and slice very, very thin slices. And you can cut them this way, and if you're just going to do a small batch of sauerkraut, this is a good way to do it. But if you're going to do a large batch of sauerkraut, then I would suggest that maybe you invest yourself in a kraut cutter or a cabbage cutter. And this is a board that has 2 knives on it, and it works really slick. You take the cabbage and you just run it along the knives, and the cabbage is automatically sliced for you in nice thin slices. There. Now you can see how nicely that has sliced. Now it's very important that when we're making cabbage, sauerkraut, that we measure very carefully. So I have my scales here, and I'm going to go ahead and start with about 2.5 pounds of cabbage. So that's exactly 2.5 pounds. And our recipe says that for every 5 pounds of cabbage, we add 3 tablespoons of salt. So for 2.5, I'm adding 1.5 tablespoons of salt, which I've already measured. And then we'll go ahead and mix this cabbage up real good. You distribute the salt evenly, and then we're going to just let this cabbage set now for a few minutes, and in the few minutes that it sets, while I'm kind of cleaning up my mess, the salt will draw the moisture from the cabbage, and then we'll have some liquid that we're going to place into our crock. Now the crock that I'm going to use is just a large glass jar. You could also use a stoneware crock for fermenting your cabbage. So I've already placed some in here, and now I'm going to go ahead and place the rest of this cabbage into my jar. When putting it into your crock or your jar, push it down. See how I'm pushing it down, and see how the liquid comes to the top? We want to have liquid come to the top of our cabbage and cover our cabbage. So we'll push it down in there and really squeeze it down in there. Sometimes we have real moist cabbage, and sometimes the cabbage is a little bit drier. If the cabbage is a little drier, it may take a little bit longer to set, or we may have to push it a little bit more to kind of break down the cells. And then we'll go ahead and pour the remaining liquid on top of our jar. Okay, we kind of fill it to the neck of our jar. It came out just right. And now we're going to cover our jar, not with a lid, but some kind of a weight we need so that the weight will push on the cabbage and the liquid will then come to the top. So what I kind of like to use is a plastic bag which I've put some water in, and of course I double the bag in case I get a hole in the bottom one, and then I just slip this right on top of my cabbage like that. Now you can see how the liquid is brought up above the cabbage. Now this is ready to ferment, and what we do is to set this at room temperature, and that's between 68 and 72 degrees are the ideal temperatures for fermenting pickle products. And we'll watch this every now and then. So a couple times a week we'll go down wherever we're fermenting our cabbage, and we'll check to see that there's no mold on top. If you see some mold starting to form on top, then take a spoon and scoop it off. Don't let it just go, because it'll mold the whole batch. But if you remove it from time to time as it starts to form, then you'll have really nice kraut when you're through. So now how do you know how long to do it? I said we ferment it for 3 weeks. It'll take 3 weeks to ferment this kraut. And one thing you'll notice, it will start to change color as it ferments. See how bright green it is? When our kraut is finished, it will turn the light white color, the kind of translucent color. And so that's one way that you can kind of tell, but don't be misled. It takes 3 weeks to do it, but you will notice that the color will change at the end of the 3 weeks' time. Also, don't be alarmed by the smell, because when it's fermenting, it's going to smell like fermented cabbage. And don't be alarmed by that either. But it's really relatively easy to make the kraut, and at the end of the 3-week fermenting period, we'll take the kraut out of this crock and we'll heat it to a simmering temperature. And then we'll pack it into clean straw or clean jars, put the hot kraut in, put the lids on, and then we'll process the kraut for 15 minutes in a hot water bath, boiling water bath, like we did our quick pickles, except it's 15 minutes for the kraut, and we start counting the processing time as soon as we put them into the boiling water bath. So follow your instructions for processing of your kraut. Okay, now let's take a look at some dill pickles that I've already started. I have them in a few stages here. This here is a crock that's about halfway through the fermenting, and you can see in the bottom, see the plate in the bottom of here, that's holding my pickles or my cucumbers down under the brine. You can also see some little white things that are floating on the top. Those little white things are some mold, and this is why it's important that we check our pickles daily. For pickles like this, we want to remove this mold. Also with dill pickles or fermenting cucumbers, a scum will form on the top. This scum also is normal and should be removed every day to keep our pickles from spoiling on us. Okay, we got these removed now. These have another week or so to about another week to ferment, so we'll go ahead and set these over here. And then I have another batch of pickles that has finished the fermenting process. I've packed some in my jar already, and here I have some in the crock. You'll note that pickles, when they're finished fermenting, will turn kind of an olive green color. And if you are questioning whether they're fermented enough, cut one in half. The inside of it will be kind of a translucent color. Okay, so we'll go ahead and continue packing and fill up our jar. I have taken some of the brine out of this crock and put it on the stove, and it's heating. And the hot brine will be poured over the top of these pickles. If your brine that you ferment them in looks dark and doesn't look good anymore, then you can always make a fresh brine following the recipe that you used for brining the pickles. Okay, now we can pour this brine on. Most people, however, I should say, like to use this brine that they fermented the pickles in because the flavor's a little bit better. Okay, fill it again to a ½ inch from the top. And now we're going to go ahead and run our knife down along the sides of the pickle to relieve any air bubbles that might be down in here. And then we're going to wipe the edge of our jar. And then put our hot lid on our jar. This lid was soaked in water for a few minutes according to the directions that came with the lids, to soften the rubber, and then we're going to tighten on the screw band, tighten it on snugly. Now these pickles are ready for the boiling water bath. I have my boiling water bath ready, and these pickles again are processed in the boiling water bath to kill microorganisms to assure us a safe, good pickle product next winter. Okay, we're going to put these in here. And with a fermented pickle now, we start counting the processing time as soon as these pickles go into the water. So as soon as I put these into my water now, I'll set my timer for 15 minutes. So it's very important that you follow the instructions that come with your pickles so you're sure that you know how long the processing time is and when you start counting the processing time. So that's how we make fermented pickles. Now let's kind of review some of the things that we've discussed today. First of all, remember you need a reliable reference. Be sure you follow the directions carefully and measure everything very accurately. Select fresh, tender vegetables and firm fruit. Pack in a crock for 3 weeks for fermented pickles and into jars for fresh pickles. Process according to the recipe. And store the pickles in a dark, dry, cool place. And store away from light to prevent bleaching of the pickles and possible deterioration of flavor. Now, if you need further information on making pickles, contact your local county extension office and you can obtain this bulletin on pickle and relish making. The location of your county extension office can be obtained by looking in your phone book under local government. For the part of our program where we discuss food safety. I'm happy to say that we have Carolyn Robb, OSU Extension Foods and Nutrition Specialist, with us today. She's brought several samples with us and we'll discuss some of the things that might go wrong with your pickle making. Carolyn, can you tell us how we know if the acidity level of our pickling brines is high enough to preserve these products that we're going to pickle?
Well, if you're using a recipe, Nellie, that's not from a recommended reference, it is important to check it carefully. When we make a quick pickle, we need to have at least as much vinegar as water to prevent the growth of Clostridium botulinum. This would mean then that if you're using 2 cups of water, you must have at least 2 or more cups of vinegar. When we make fermented pickles, though, this is a different story. We actually use little or no vinegar. And the reason for this is that acid is produced during the fermentation process. So actually, the acidity of our quick and our fermented pickles will be comparable at the end of the period.
Now, what if I find these pickles a little bit tart? Is there anything I can do to make them less sour or less tart?
Well, definitely don't decrease the acid. That's not a safe thing to do. That would allow for Clostridium botulinum growth. But you could add a little bit of sugar.
Well, that's good. Now, let me ask you another question. In the last several years, they've been recommending processing of pickles. I know this is something that's, has recently been added to the instructions. Lots of people don't like to do this, but is there a real good reason for it?
Well, processing preserves the quality of our pickles, Nellie. There are certain microorganisms, molds, yeast, and bacteria, that can grow when the acid content is high. As we see on our chart, these are destroyed at boiling water temperatures. And this is why we recommend processing our pickles 4 recommended times in the boiling water bath. We might also mention that processing is a convenience, particularly in the case of fermented pickles. Otherwise, you would need to continue checking them periodically during storage, and you would have to skim off any scum or mold layer that would have formed. I have an example with me today of some fermented pickles that obviously got very much out of control. There's just a very, very heavy layer of mold growth. They're obviously very spoiled.
They even smell it.
Very bad, yes. And so this could have been prevented by checking them periodically, but I think the easiest thing to do would be to process them in jars for the recommended length of time. But we do need to caution people that they shouldn't process before the end of the fermentation period. The entire 3-week period is necessary to get adequate acid production.
If a small amount of mold forms on the top while we're fermenting, then it should be removed, and this is why we check them daily. This is
right.
Okay, and if we don't, then this is what happens.
Yes.
What other things can happen with pickle products that might not make them safe?
Well, sometimes we have different signs of spoilage, Nellie. For instance, we might have some cloudiness or sediment. Sometimes we notice that our pickles have turned slippery or slimy. We have an example here of a jar that really is quite cloudy. And most likely these pickles were not processed and yeast growth has continued. This could have been prevented by processing properly. If the acid-water ratio is 1:1 in this quick pickle, the pickle will be safe to eat, but perhaps lower in quality.
Now, if this cloudiness occurs right after you take it out of the boiling water bath, then it's probably, powdered spices.
Yes, that's
But if
right.
it happens several weeks or months later, then it's a microorganism.
It most likely is microbial growth.
What about these pink pickles? Are they spoiled? They look kind of like you're getting ready for Christmas.
These actually are safe to eat. This is a very interesting phenomenon that occurs occasionally. It's due to the dill. The pigment in the dill has changed into this pink shade. We really don't know what causes this. We don't know how to prevent it. It's kind of just a very different color, obviously, but the pickles are safe to eat.
Now, if this happens to my sauerkraut, is it the same thing?
No, it is different, because if you get a pink layer on top of sauerkraut, this indicates spoilage. There is a particular yeast that grows and produces that pink color.
Let many of our older recipes call for the addition of alum and slaked lime. Is this still recommended?
No, actually our modern recipes do not include these ingredients. They used to be used to increase the crispness of pickles. And we feel now that if you use good quality ingredients, you don't need to use the alum or the lime.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. This has been Carolyn Robb, OSU Extension Foods Nutrition Specialist. Well, this concludes our Food for Later program on series on pickling. I hope that you have gained some tips on making pickles. And if you still have some questions on pickle making or food safety aspect, be sure you contact your local county extension office. Here's a bulletin that you can obtain again, making pickles and relishes at home.
In Ohio, table salt is not the same as canning or pickling salt. It has an anti-caking substance added to it. Although uniodized table salt could be used for pickling, it is not recommended by the specialists at Ohio State University. It makes cloudy pickles. Since cloudiness is also a sign of spoilage, it would be hard to tell whether or not your pickles would be safe to eat. If you have more questions about pickles or sauerkraut, feel free to give us a call at the Medina County Cooperative Extension Service. In Wadsworth, call 336-6657. In Medina, 725-4911. And in Brunswick, call 225-7100. For your free fact sheet on pickling, just send a self-addressed stamped envelope along with your request. Or if you would like the USDA publication, Making Pickles and Relishes at Home, send us a check for $4.75. Mail your request to the Medina County Cooperative Extension Service, 144 North Broadway, Medina, Ohio, 44256. Next time, we'll talk about drying foods at home. I'm Nancy Hudson. Thanks for joining us.
This has been the Medina County Extension Update, brought to you by your local office of the Ohio State University Cooperative Extension Service.
If you're in the mood to redecorate your home, you'll want to stay tuned for some tips from the Decorating Council.
There's no question that space is at a premium today. Many people live in apartments or compact townhouses. Decorating these smaller spaces is a challenge, particularly because one room may have 2 or more functions, such as kitchens that have dining areas. Here we see a hall, kitchen, and dining area held together through color coordination and pattern compatibility. The foil wallpaper complements the shining chrome furniture, and the total effect is very contemporary. Another example, the atmosphere altogether different, friendly country. Several coordinated patterns blend the dining area and kitchen. Living areas that convert to guest rooms are another challenge. Everything starts with the bed sofa, which here is the inspiration for a warm decorating scheme. The border print on the sofa bed with reverse colors at the window is teamed with small prints for the walls. When the challenge is to give the feeling of opening up space, mini prints on the walls are the answer. Pale colors and light furniture help too. They all allow your eye to move around without interruption, giving you a more spacious feeling. A strong all-over pattern used on every surface, including the vanity doors, adds a lot to the feeling of space in a small bathroom. There is no change in pattern to interrupt your eye. Hallways with many doors are a problem. Small prints like this one can work wonders. Covering the walls and even the doors with it will minimize the cut-up look and maximize the feeling of space. If you feel your ceilings are too low, strong vertical stripes visually raise them. The same effect comes about with a pattern of vines that twine upward, taking your eye with them. You can achieve the same feeling by using relatively low furniture, like the bench in this bathroom. Sometimes it makes sense to visually lower the ceiling, if a especially high one is making the room seem small by proportion. To do this, create strong horizontals, like this deep floral border applied to the built-in shelf at the floor level. If you can create a new area in a limited space, your whole house will seem to expand. A closet will accommodate a powder room, or perhaps a laundry. A back entry or a breezeway could be turned into a small, sunny sitting area, a perfect place for plants. Small spaces, especially apartments, are often quite without architectural interest, but you can easily add these details and make your space seem more important. Simple barnwood beams and rails add a lot of decoration here. Coupled with 3 friendly red patterns, they give a country mood to a small, plain space. Interesting wood moldings available at lumber yards are a simple way to add details like chair rails and cornices. They give the classic treatment to a traditional decorating scheme. Or, as in this pretty bedroom, large frames are painted to contrast with the wall pattern and applied to the walls after papering for a paneled look. Handling limited space is a challenge to our decorating skills. We've shown you some of the tricks that professional designers use to decorate small spaces. We hope you'll find them helpful. For more decorating information, write to Sunworthy Wall Coverings, Post Office Box 2305, Bramalea, Ontario, Canada, L6T 3Y9.
And that's all for this edition of Brunswick Today. If you're interested in starting your own home business, you'll be interested in tuning in next week when the Medina County Cooperative Extension Service talks about their upcoming program on starting your own business. That's all for this week. I'm Jeff Neidert for Brunswick Today. See you next week.